My name is Jamie Lester. I'm a bronze sculptor. I've worked for 18 years now in this field. Graduated from WVU in 1997, and I've started my business, Lester Sculpture, immediately right in 1997, and did that for 15 years. And in the last 3 years, I've created my new business, Vandalia Bronze, with my partner Jeff Edwards. I started off a two-dimensional artist, drawing, painting, and felt really adept at that, and I was almost kind of bored with that, really at that time in my sophomore year of college at WVU. And I took a ceramics course, pottery. It was so hard and so challenging that the feel of the clay, the challenge of it just hooked me. Thanks to the help of a friend, I made a contact with a local art foundry, sculpture bronze foundry, called Shado Bronze, Sheidow, and started doing sculpture for them in the form of portraits for plaques, small portraits for tombstones, gravestones, and philanthropic kind of applications, sports, things like that. And for about 15 years I did that exclusively, portraits for foundries and monument companies all over the nation. It wasn't until the Jerry West statue that I had the opportunity to do some large-scale, full-round statue sculpture. I entered that competition, and it was pretty fierce competition, some really talented artists from around the state of West Virginia. So winning that against that competition was a real achievement, and I still feel like that's one of my strongest pieces, the Jerry West statue. With the advent of Vandalia Bronze, it was created in 2013, or 2012, I'm sorry. I do exclusively statues now, so really able to sink my teeth into some really exciting, challenging projects.
Jamie and I are close friends. We play music together. Our kids were friends. We've known each other for a long time, and talked to Jamie about starting a company. And of course, he had his own group of work and clients that he was working with, and so we just started to market and go after. Our goal was to make bronze statues, tell a story in bronze, and so we started that process, and we're lucky enough to find some good customers, clients early on, and here we are. My duties include are the business end, so a lot of times I check email, see if there's any client correspondence going on, approvals for art pieces that Jamie's working on. Setting up meetings for clients coming here, us going other locations. Mainly the people that we pursue are large organizations and people that, it's memorial art. That's people, they're trying to recognize donors, significant historical figures, contributors to their organization. Right now we're working on Hot Rod Hudley, which is he was a Hall of Fame broadcaster, but he's also a very well-known basketball player for West Virginia University.
It was very important to WVU that the Hot Rod Hundley statue matched the style and finish of the Jerry West statue. So yes, when the Hot Rod Hundley statue project became a reality and we were moving forward with it, then I was considered the only artist for the job. I started work on the Hot Rod Hundley statue about a month ago. We've been in the rough design of the piece and talks for a couple of years. It's just taken a while to raise the money to move forward. This is about the shortest period of time that we could possibly create the statue, because the foundry is going to need about 4 months. WVU would like to unveil this statue and dedicate it at a basketball game this coming season. So at a home basketball game. So that's going to be somewhere around February or March. That really doesn't give us much time. We'd like to finish up all of our work here in October, so I really only have a couple of months to finish the piece and then give my mold makers time to carefully take all the impressions from the piece. Next year, we're going to unveil the Don Knotts statue, which is going to be on High Street in front of the Metropolitan Theater. And I've been working on that project for about 8 years now, since he passed in, I think he passed in 2007. We have been planning this monument with the Knotts estate, and finally it's going to come to fruition. The last 3 years really, I've been doing work for the Boy Scouts of America, and they have been a great client to work for. They've enabled me to be so creative with some of these projects. These projects I've been able to handle from the design to the installation phase, and they've been really, really open and allowing me to flex my creative muscles. It's been really fun. I'm used to working alone, and I'm here alone a lot. But lately, because of the busyness of my time, or my projects, the new numbers of projects, I've had a few helpers here, a few staff members that are always here. It's a little bit of a challenge to manage people. But on the other hand, it brings an energy to the studio that's nice.
But several steps above me, and that's just dandy. Wish I could hold your hand at least.
Whenever I get the opportunity to start a project, from whether it's a bronze statue or a painting or anything, I think everything that finishes up at the end is linked to how it starts. So how it begins, the design choices that you make at the very beginning you're going to live with those to the very end. So I try to be, from the beginning, be very careful and very creative, and trying to create a design on paper that follows through, and those same kind of concepts are translated to the maquette, or the small model. A maquette, spelled M-A-Q-U-E-T-T-E, is a word which means mock-up, and all it is a small version, a small mock-up or model of what eventually will be the finished product, or the full-size piece. So it's really just a tool used to work out problems on a small scale that will eventually be considered in a large-scale piece.
I make maquettes, which are the small model versions, build armatures, which is the interior structure of sculptures. Been making molds with Eric. You know, when molds have to be made, I work with Eric to make molds. I do the general stuff. You know, I just generally make a kind of a blank figure. You know, if it's of a type of a figure, if it's a female figure, a child, you know, I make the adjustment so that it fits for that. You know, But a lot of the detail, the clothing, the face, the portraiture, Jamie does all that stuff. You know, I just kind of make a start for him to build on later.
I use a process where I take photos of the maquette from 8 different views, and I mark the base of the maquette from 8 different points, and I take photographs from those rotated around, and then start to weld an armature. Armature starts with steel. Steel is we use a weldable steel, hot rolled steel in hollow tube that's about either a 3/4 of an inch square or an inch square, welded to 1/4 inch plates that are drilled and bolted to a wooden frame. After we've created the full size armature in the steel and we're comfortable that it's accurate, we attach foam. We use a foam, whether it's polystyrene sheets of foam that are wired around the steel armature, or a polyurethane spray foam. We put wire around the armature, around the steel structure, the steel skeleton. We put wire around it so that the foam has someplace to go into and expand around and secure it to the steel armature. All these things are just meant to create a very strong structure that will hold up all the 1,000 pounds of clay or more that will just pile onto that armature. I like to approach the very first time you're adding clay, you're thinking of the structure of the piece. It's all sculpting, and if you approach it that it's not sculpting, that you're just piling on clay in a kind of arbitrary way, then it will cost you time and focus later. I like to use a water clay as opposed to a plastilina clay, partly because I went to school at WVU for ceramics, and I'm really comfortable with clay, and I love the feel of that clay. It affords me the ability to do so much more than with the plastilina, which I've also used plastilina for years, but I really choose to use the ceramic water clay. The overall shape of the piece in space is key. It's important. The details are really not important. They are, but they're like that you could live without them. And what's really important is the overall shape of the piece, whether it's the drapery of the fabric or the shape of the musculature and the arms. The artist's mind comes through in all those things, and the way the artist solves those problems. So there's kind of a signature in every shape, every touch. A lot of people focus on the details, but what they miss and what maybe an artist will see or a sculptor will see when he sees the piece is the overall shapes, which the average layperson might not be aware of it. But if it's wrong, they will be aware. Like, they maybe can't quite put their finger on it, but they're aware of it somehow. And then after all that, the clay is done and perfected, then it's a matter of more of a technical matter, of challenge of trying to use the materials that you have to make a great mold and capture all of the details, so that everything you put, all that work that went into the design, and then the creation of the full-size piece gets captured by the molds.
I've known of Jamie for a long time, since I moved here in 2006, but I didn't have an opportunity to meet him until about a year and a half, 2 years ago maybe. I just told him that I knew somebody who did work here at the time, Joseph, and that I love making molds and mold making and casting, and would really like to come out and just see the studio and see the process. And so he's like, "Yeah, you should come out. You can make our molds," and that's kind of how it started.
Eric is interesting. I think his mold making kind of comes from less like a fine art sculpture and more of like a kind of like a movie special effects. You know, so it's really using like high tech procedures and time saving, material saving. So that's really interesting to learn.
So when it's done, what happens is the clay is either, some sections are separated depending on whether you're able to part, whether the way the molds come apart. You need to, sometimes if you don't take things off them, it can't be taken apart. And then once those are separated, you part the mold, which means you basically make the the line where the mold is separated. So you'll part the mold with these metal shims, then you'll release the mold, which is the material you put on to keep everything from sticking. It's a release. Then you put a rubber on it. It's a polyurethane rubber, is usually what we use. And then you put on basically a plaster jacket. It's an ultracal, it's like a plaster cement kind of mix with fiberglass. So if you peel the rubber off a mold, it's like a thin rubber, it's just a floppy mold. You can't fill it with anything because it moves around, it doesn't hold its shape. So you need what's called a mother mold, which is what this hard plaster mold is. And that pops off and you can put the rubber in it and it keeps the shape to the way it was originally. So then you take all those pieces and you send them to the foundry.
What happens is we deliver our molds to the foundry. Step one is they paint a wax into those molds and they create an exact copy of what I made in clay. They make that in wax, but it's hollow. And then they cut those into small castable sections of about 16 inches. And they invest them, or cover them, or surround them in this liquid ceramic shell material. So it's like a ceramic mud, it's a slurry. They dip them in there so that they're completely covered inside and out with this ceramic material, and then they dip them in sand and they could do successive coats of both until they build up about a half-inch layer around the entire wax piece. Then they fire that piece so that the wax melts and is removed from the mold. From that essentially becomes a mold, what they dip it in. That's the mold. They fire that so that the wax comes out, and then they pour molten bronze back into that void where the wax was. So when it cools, they just hammer off all that ceramic shell, which by that point is kind of like a stucco. It has the same kind of, the heat changes it a little bit and turns it into this like very powdery stucco-like material. You hammer it off and you sandblast it to remove all the little bits of shell, ceramic shell, and what's left is this piece of bronze, piece of metal that is exactly the same shape as that piece of wax that they first invested. I am always interested in fine art, and it's a funny distinction between commissioned art and fine art, because I do approach my commissioned art in the same way, really. I try to put as much integrity and quality and thought and depth into every project I do, whether it's commercial or fine art. And what I'm most passionate about is the figure, my work with the figure. No matter what our body shape is like or what we look like, there's a beauty that's in everyone's eyes and spirit. So that's what I'd like to capture and tell a story about. My goal, long-term goal, is to show my fine art work in galleries around the world. And I feel confident that I'll get there. 2, 3, 4.
You always said you'd never leave your West Virginia home. The earth could rotate on and leave you all alone. But then you broke your promise made in chilly mountain air, traveled to a stony city far away from here. In these hills you wait for me, in these hills you call, in these hills you whisper to me, in these hills you walk, in these hills you whisper to me, these hills I call me. Then the devil tried to tempt you, just like he said he would. You did not turn away from him, nobody ever could. It was not long for you returned to the hills and mounts rejoiced. They always knew that you